Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. What we're doing today is going through the biology curriculum, hitting all the highlights so that when you get to that state test at the end of the year, you know exactly what's going on. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're talking about today. So these are the standards we're going to try to address. We're really looking at Darwin and his ideas on how evolution happened through natural selection, and we're going to talk about how we get all the different types of animals on the earth today. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling and refresh y'all's memory a little bit. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to talk about early life. Where did life get started on the planet? Well, most scientists agree that life most likely got started deep in the ocean near hydrothermal vents. Here, the heat, chemicals, and water conditions would best facilitate the necessary chemical reactions to create the first forms of life. This was the primordial soup that life on Earth sprang from. So deep down in the bottom of the ocean, there's these vents. The vents are spewing out a lot of heat as well as different chemicals, and those chemicals and heat and the fact that it was in the water kind of mixed together perfectly in order to form the first forms of life. Okay, from there it gets a little more complicated. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is organic evolution. What's going on here is a theory called endosymbiosis. Okay, this is how our cells evolved to where they are today. Okay, when these amoeba-like cells ingested the chloroplast, they became the first autotrophic organisms. Single-celled organisms were the first forms of life. Autotrophic single-celled organisms performed photosynthesis for about 3.5 billion years. This produced oxygen and oxygenated Earth's atmosphere. Once oxygen was in high abundance on Earth, we started to see the first multicellular organisms about 600 million years ago. Multicellular organisms cannot exist without oxygen to help produce energy. So let's take a closer look at that endosymbiosis theory. Okay, so what's going on here is this is how our cells kind of evolved. What's going on is on the left we have this ancestral cell. Okay, it has a nucleus, but it doesn't have some of the other organelles that we needed today. What's going on is scientists think that this amoeba-like cell ingested an aerobic bacterium and a cyanobacterium, and instead of dissolving them and destroying them and eating them, they kind of formed this win-win scenario where the aerobic and the aerobic bacterium and the cyanobacteria got a free place to live, but they were making energy and food for the cell. This aerobic bacterium eventually would become our mitochondrium, and the cyanobacterium would eventually become the chloroplast in some of those autotrophic cells. So endosymbiosis, it's basically absorbing these bacterium cells, not destroying them, but instead forming a win-win relationship where these cells don't have to worry about being eaten by a larger organism, and the cell gets free energy and free food. Okay? So the next thing I wanted to talk about is some different types of evidence that supports the theory of evolution. Okay? This one is called homologous structures. Remember that prefix homo means similar. And if you look at these limbs of these different animals, you'll see that they all look very similar. Okay, what's going on is that all tetrapods, a tetrapod is an animal with 4 limbs. So we're a tetrapod, dogs and cats are tetrapods, most animals are tetrapods. Okay? Scientists think that all tetrapods, if you go back far enough, have a common ancestor. And one thing that supports this idea is the arrangement of our limb bones. The limb bones in all tetrapods are the same. What we call it, it has a little nickname. It goes 1 bone, 2 bone, many bones, and digits. And you'll see that the human, the dog, the bird, the whale, and in fact all tetrapods has this same arrangement of bones. 1 bone, 2 bone, many bones, and digits. Okay? The reason that scientists think that this is evidence that supports the theory that all of these animals have a common ancestor is that it's just more likely that this arrangement of limb bones appeared once and was successful and stuck around than each of these different organisms, every single tetrapod, coming upon this arrangement of bones independently of each other. For scientists, it's just more likely that it appeared once and that it stuck around than each organism developed it independently of each other. So again, this is called homologous structures, and it's evidence that these organisms, all tetrapods, have a common ancestor. Let's take a look at some more evidence that supports the theory of evolution. This one is called vestigial structures. What is a vestigial structure? Well, these are old body structures that seem to have lost their original function in the species over an evolutionary timescale. These vestigial structures basically tell a story, and the story is that this organism has changed over time, and that's all evolution is change over time. So this is a skeleton of a whale, and what you would notice that these skeletons of whales have hip bones. Okay, well, why would they have hip bones if they don't have those hind limbs, right? You can see that the spine turns into the tail. Why would this little bone here marked A, why would a whale have a hip bone? Well, whales have not always lived in the ocean. They had a common ancestor way far back in time that actually lived on the ground, was a terrestrial animal and was walking around on all fours. Its closest relative is the hippo, so kind of think of a hippo. It's a four-limbed animal, but it spends a lot of its time in the water. That's what this organism used to be like. But as it moved from the land and started living in the water more and more and more, it was advantageous not to have those hind limbs and instead just have a tail. So again, these vestigial structures just tell a story. It tells a story about how these animals have changed over time, and evolution is just change over time. Okay, let's keep it going. So another piece of evidence that supports the theory of evolution is the fossil record. The fossil record shows how organisms have changed over time. And remember, that's what evolution is, it's change over time. We can trace how early humans have evolved through the fossil record. If you looked at all these skulls of these are all skulls of early humans called hominins. And you'll see that they don't all look alike. The size of their brain case is different. The shape of their teeth are different. You can see this one here has an extra bone sticking out of the top of its head called a sagittal crest. So again, this fossil record, it just tells a story about how organisms have changed over time. And we can see that in the fossil record. When we go and we look in the ground and we're digging up these bones, they don't all look exactly like how humans look today. So we know that they've changed over time. Okay? Another piece of evidence that supports the theory of evolution is molecular evidence. There is strong evidence that supports the theory of evolution based on the similarities in DNA and protein sequences. All living organisms use the same basic genetic code, DNA. So the fact that all organisms, every living thing on the planet has DNA in its cell, that's another strong piece of evidence that show that everything is related. If you go back far enough, you would be able to find a last universal common ancestor. You can see how these lines show the relationship between these different organisms and how closely related they are. But notice that they all come back to the same point. And scientists, this is a hypothetical animal, a hypothetical organism that scientists called LUCA, last universal common ancestor. It was probably the first organism to have DNA in its cell. Because DNA was so successful and is so good at transmitting information across generations, it just stuck around. And that's why we see it in every organism today. It's just more likely that it arose once and was very successful and stuck around than every single living thing on the planet coming up with this strategy independently of each other. Okay, so that's another piece of evidence that supports the theory of evolution. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about is cladograms. A cladogram is a diagram that illustrates the evolutionary relationships among various groups of organisms, displaying their connectedness based on shared traits in a branching tree-like structure. So you can use this to find how closely these organisms are related to each other and what traits they share. Okay, thank you all so much for making it here today. Your teacher has some other work for you to do, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.